The silence in my apartment had a texture. It was a thick, gray felt, muffling the edges of the world and pressing in on me from all sides. For 2 years, since I had moved into apartment 3A, that silence had been my most constant companion. It was the backdrop to the quiet click of my keyboard, the soft scratch of my pencil on drawing paper, the gentle sigh of the old radiator in the corner. I lived a life measured in small sounds and predictable routines. I worked from home as a graphic designer, a job that suited my temperament perfectly. It required observation and quiet focus, two things I had in abundance. My world was contained within these four walls, a carefully curated ecosystem of solitude. It wasn't a sad life, not exactly. It was just muted. Then there was Leo. Leo, in apartment 3B, was the opposite of muted. He was a cacophony of life, a vibrant splash of color against my grayscale existence. I knew the sound of his heavy work boots on the landing outside our doors. I knew the low rumble of his voice when he talked on the phone, the sound bleeding faintly through our shared wall. I knew the scent of sawdust and something sharp, like citrus, that clung to him when he passed me in the hall. He was a carpenter, a builder of things. He took raw materials and made them into something solid and useful. I took ideas and made them into pixels on a screen. It felt like a metaphor for our entire existence. My crush on him was just another part of the silence. A secret I kept folded neatly in a corner of my heart, something I would take out and examine in the quiet hours of the night. It was a hopeless, pointless thing. Leo was Leo. He was all easy smiles and casual confidence, the kind of man who seemed to have a different woman leaving his apartment every few weeks. They were always beautiful, always laughing, their bright voices echoing in the hallway as he walked them out. He was, by all available evidence, resoundingly straight. And so, I watched from a distance, an astronomer charting the course of a star he could never hope to reach. Our interactions were limited to brief, polite nods in the hallway, a held door at the entrance, a muttered hey at the mailboxes. Each one was a tiny, insignificant event for him, and a seismic one for me. I would spend hours dissecting the angle of his smile, the length of his eye contact. It was pathetic, and I knew it. The day it all changed started like any other. It was a Tuesday in October, the sky the color of a dull nickel. I was hunched over my tablet, trying to perfect the curve of a logo, the felted silence of my apartment wrapped around me like a blanket. A sharp, decisive knock on my door shattered it. It wasn't the tentative rap of a delivery person. It was a solid, confident sound. It was Leo's knock. I knew it instantly. My heart did a stupid, frantic little tap dance against my ribs. I froze, my stylus hovering over the screen. He had never knocked on my door before. Not once in 2 years. Another knock, harder this time. "Julian? You in there, man?" His voice. It was deeper, clearer, without the wall to muffle it. It vibrated right through the wood of the door and into my chest. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the ridiculous flutter in my stomach. I stood up, my socked feet silent on the hardwood floor. I ran a hand through my messy hair, a pointless gesture, and pulled the door open just a crack. And there he was. He filled the entire doorframe, a mountain of casual masculinity. He was wearing a faded gray t-shirt that stretched across his broad chest, a smudge of what looked like wood stain on one sleeve. His jeans were worn and dusted with fine sawdust, and his hair was a messy tumble of dark curls. The scent of him, sawdust, citrus, and something uniquely, warmly Leo, washed over me. He gave me a slightly sheepish, slightly cocky grin that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. "Hey," he said, his voice a low, easy rumble. "Sorry to bother you. Got a weird favor to ask." I just stared at him for a second, my brain struggling to catch up. All the clever, witty things I could possibly say flew out of my head, leaving a complete and total void. "Oh," I managed, my voice sounding thin and unfamiliar. "Hi." His grin widened, as if he found my awkwardness amusing. "My dryer just crapped out on me. Mid-cycle. I've got a load of work clothes in there that are soaking wet, and I need him for tomorrow." He gestured over his shoulder with his thumb, toward his own apartment. "Landlord won't be able to get a guy out here until Thursday. I was wondering, any chance I could use yours?" He held up a blue plastic laundry basket, heaped with damp, dark clothes. It was such a mundane, domestic request, yet it felt like he had just asked to borrow a kidney. "My dryer." He wanted to come into my apartment. into my quiet, ordered, solitary space. The thought sent a jolt of pure panic, followed by a wave of something else, something warm and treacherous and hopeful, through me. My dryer? I repeated, like an idiot. Yeah, he said, his eyes scanning my face, a hint of amusement in their dark depths. The hot box that makes wet things dry. Unless you're still using a clothesline and a washboard in there. A small laugh escaped me, more a nervous puff of air than anything else. No washboard. Yeah, of course. Come on in. I opened the door wider, stepping back to let him pass. He moved past me into the narrow entryway, and the entire atmosphere of my apartment shifted. His presence was a physical thing, a change in air pressure. He was too big, too vibrant for this quiet space. He seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room, leaving me lightheaded. He looked around, his gaze taking in my sparsely decorated living room, the clean lines of my sofa, the stack of art books on the coffee table, the large, abstract painting I'd done hanging on the far wall. Nice place, he said, his voice softer now. It's clean. I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or an observation on how sterile my life was compared to his. Thanks. The laundry room is just through here. I led the way down the short hall, past my bedroom door, to the small utility closet that housed my stacked washer and dryer. I was intensely aware of him behind me, of the sound of his boots on my floor, of the warmth radiating from his body. My skin prickled. I opened the closet door and flicked on the light. The machines were old but reliable. I gestured toward the top one. There you go. It's nothing fancy, but it gets the job done. Leo set his basket down with a soft thud. This is perfect. You're a lifesaver, Julian. He said my name, and the sound of it in his mouth was different. Solid. Real. Not just a word I saw on my mail. He started transferring his wet clothes from the basket to the dryer, his movements efficient and sure. I watched the muscles in his back and shoulders shift under the thin fabric of his shirt. He was so effortlessly physical, so at home in his own body. I felt like a collection of awkward angles and nervous energy in comparison. I should have left. I should have said, let me know when you're done, and retreated to the safety of my living room. But I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, leaning against the doorframe of the closet, watching him. It was a strange, illicit thrill, having him here, in the heart of my home, performing such a normal task. He finished loading the clothes and shut the dryer door. He turned the dial to high heat, and the machine rumbled to life, a low, comforting hum that filled the small space. He turned back to me, leaning against the now vibrating machine. We were standing in a narrow hallway, barely 3 feet apart. The space felt charged, electric. So, he said, crossing his arms over his chest, the movement causing his biceps to strain against his sleeves. What do I owe you for the rental? Oh, nothing. I said quickly, maybe too quickly. Don't be ridiculous. It's just a dryer. Nah, I gotta give you something, he insisted. His eyes held mine, and I felt a strange heat creep up my neck. How about a beer? I've got a cold 6-pack in my fridge. We can drink, and while we wait for this thing to finish. My brain screamed no. No, that was a terrible idea. Drinking beer with Leo, sitting in my living room, making small talk? It was a minefield of potential humiliation. My carefully constructed wall of polite distance would be obliterated. But my mouth, that traitorous part of me that secretly longed for the very thing I feared, had other ideas. Okay, I heard myself say. A beer sounds good. Leo's smile was slow and genuine this time. It lit up his whole face. Awesome. I'll be right back. Don't let my jeans shrink. He gave a little wink, then disappeared back down the hall. I heard my front door open and close. I was left alone in the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. The low hum of the dryer felt like the only thing holding me upright. Leo was coming back. He was going to sit on my sofa. We were going to drink beer together. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The gray, felted silence of my life had been torn open, and something bright and loud and unpredictable had just walked right in. I stayed there for a long moment, just breathing. The air was still thick with his scent. I looked at the dryer, at his dark work clothes tumbling behind the glass. It was the most surreal thing I had ever seen. Leo's clothes, in my dryer, in my apartment. A small, intimate piece of his life was now intertwined with mine, even if only for the next 60 minutes. A 60-minute cycle. I had an hour. An hour with the man I'd been silently obsessed with for 2 years. My mind raced. What would we talk about? What if I said something stupid? What if he saw the ridiculous, hopeful yearning in my eyes? The knock came again, quicker this time. I walked to the door and opened it. Leo stood there with 2 bottles of beer, condensation beating on the dark brown glass. He held one out to me. Our fingers brushed as I took it, a spark of contact that shot straight up my arm. His skin was warm and slightly rough. It was a meaningless, accidental touch, but my entire nervous system registered it as a major event. One for the landlord, he said, his grin back in place. I led him into the living room. He settled onto one end of my sofa, sinking into the cushions with a comfortable sigh. He looked right there, as if he belonged. It was a dangerous thought. I sat on the armchair opposite him, a safe distance away, perching on the edge of the cushion like a nervous bird. I took a long swallow of my beer, the cold liquid a welcome shock to my system. So, he began, taking a drink from his own bottle. You're a graphic designer, right? I see the UPS guy dropping off those big tubes for you sometimes. I was startled that he'd noticed something so specific. Yeah, I do freelance work. Logos, websites, that kind of thing. That's cool, he said, and he sounded like he actually meant it. You work from home, then? Must be nice. No commute. It has its perks, I said, trying to sound casual. It can be a little quiet sometimes, though that was the understatement of the century. I get that. He nodded, his gaze drifting to the large painting on my wall. Did you do that? My cheeks flushed. Yeah, just a hobby. Something to do with my hands that doesn't involve a mouse. He was quiet for a moment, studying it. The painting was a chaotic swirl of deep blues and stormy grays, with a single, desperate slash of bright yellow in the center. It was basically a visual representation of my internal landscape. I like it, he said finally. There's a lot going on in there. He looked from the painting back to me, and his eyes were surprisingly perceptive. It felt like he was seeing more than just the canvas. It felt like he was seeing me. We fell into an easy rhythm of conversation after that. It was surprisingly not awkward. He told me about the custom cabinetry he was building for a client downtown, describing the challenges of working with reclaimed wood. He talked about it with a passion and a pride that I found captivating. I found myself relaxing, leaning back in my chair, actually enjoying myself. He asked me about my work, about the challenges of translating a client's vague ideas into a concrete design. He was a good listener, his gaze focused and attentive. The dryer clicked off in the hallway, its cycle complete. The sudden silence felt loud. That's me, he said, draining the last of his beer and setting the bottle down on a coaster I'd slid onto the coffee table. He stood up, and I followed him back to the laundry closet. He opened the dryer door, and a wave of hot, clean-smelling air washed over us. The scent was of laundry soap and warm cotton, but underneath it all, it was still him. He pulled out his clothes, folding them with a practiced efficiency I wouldn't have expected. He laid the folded jeans and shirts neatly in his basket. I just watched him, a strange melancholy settling over me. The hour was up. The intrusion was over. He would take his warm clothes and his easy smile and go back to his apartment, and the silence would descend on mine once more. He had one shirt left, a dark blue Henley. He held it up. It was still slightly damp at the collar. He looked from the shirt to me, then at the dryer. A strange, playful light flickered in his eyes. Still a little wet, he said, his voice a low murmur. And then it happened. He took a step forward, closing the small distance between us. He pressed the back of my shoulders gently, urging me backward until my back was flush against the warm metal door of the dryer. The heat soaked through my t-shirt, a startling, intimate sensation. My breath hitched in my throat. He was so close I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. He held up the damp shirt with one hand, his other hand resting lightly on the wall just beside my head, effectively caging me in. The world seemed to shrink to the space between our bodies, to the smell of him, to the warmth of the machine at my back. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a husky whisper that vibrated through my entire body. Heat me up, Julian. My mind went completely blank. It was a joke. It had to be a joke. A flirty, meaningless line from a guy who flirted with everyone. A straight guy? But his eyes weren't joking. They were dark and intense, searching my face for a reaction. His gaze dropped to my mouth for a fraction of a second, and then back up to my eyes. The air crackled. Time seemed to stretch and warp. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure he could hear it. This is it. This is the moment where I laugh it off, make a witty comment, and step aside. The moment where I put everything back in its neat, safe box. But I don't. I can't. I just stare at him, my lips parted, my entire body trembling with a mixture of terror and a wild, reckless hope. I say nothing. I do nothing. I just let the moment hang there between us, heavy and fragile and full of unspoken possibilities. The playful glint in his eyes softened, replaced by something more serious, more questioning. He was waiting. He had thrown the ball into my court, and he was waiting to see what I would do with it. My silence was an answer in itself, and I think we both knew it. He didn't move away. He held his position, his body a warm, solid presence in front of me, the heat of the dryer a constant pressure at my back. The low hum of the building's ventilation system was the only sound. After what felt like an eternity, he blinked slowly. A flicker of something, disappointment, uncertainty, crossed his face. He pulled back, just an inch, but the loss of his proximity was an immediate, physical ache. The spell was broken. He dropped the shirt into his laundry basket and straightened up, running a hand through his hair. The easygoing mask was back in place, but it didn't quite fit right. "Well," he said, his voice a little strained. "Guess that's not gonna work." He cleared his throat and picked up his basket. "Thanks again for the dryer, man. Really appreciate it." Anytime, I managed to choke out. The word felt like sandpaper in my throat. He gave me a tight, unreadable smile and turned to leave. I watched his back as he walked down the hall. My brain was screaming at me. Say something. Do something. Don't let him walk away. But I was frozen, trapped by years of practiced silence and self-preservation. He reached the door, his hand on the knob. And then, I found my voice. "Leo." He stopped, his back still to me. He didn't turn around. I took a shaky breath. My entire future seemed to hinge on the next words out of my mouth. "Your dryer," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I know the landlord fixed it last week." Silence. A heavy, ringing silence. I could see the tension in his shoulders. He had been coming over for 2 weeks now, almost every other day, with another emergency load of laundry. At first, I had believed him. But then I'd overheard our landlord, Mr. Henderson, in the hallway, telling Leo he was glad the new heating element had solved the problem. I had tucked that piece of information away, another mystery to analyze in the quiet of my apartment. I hadn't understood. But now, standing in the aftermath of that charged moment in the hallway, it all clicked into place with a terrifying, exhilarating clarity. He slowly turned around. His face was stripped bare of all its usual charm and swagger. He looked vulnerable. He looked caught. His eyes met mine across the length of my living room, and there was no hiding anymore. Not for either of us. "Yeah," he said, his voice low and rough. "He did. So why?" I started, but I couldn't finish the question. The answer was hanging in the air between us, as tangible as the scent of his laundry. He took a step back into the room, letting the door swing shut with a soft click. He set the laundry basket down on the floor. "Because I'm an idiot, Julian," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "Because I've been trying to find a way to talk to you for 6 months, and asking to borrow your dryer was the least stupid idea I could come up with." My world tilted on its axis. 6 months. While I had been pining in silence, charting his movements like a distant star, he had been what? Trying to talk to me? It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. "But you're—" I trailed off, unable to say the word. Straight. The label I had so confidently applied to him. The label that had kept my own feelings safely caged. A wry, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. "I know what you think. I know what it looks like." He took another step closer. "The women, that was a long time ago. Things change. People figure things out." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "I figured some things out." He was standing in the middle of my living room now. I was still by the laundry closet, the ghost of the dryer's heat still clinging to my back. We were separated by 10 feet of hardwood floor, but it felt like a chasm. "I'm not good at this," he admitted, his voice raw with a sincerity I had never heard from him before. "Words and feelings. I'm better with my hands. I build things. I don't talk about things." He gestured vaguely between us. "So I came up with the stupid dryer plan. I just wanted an excuse to be here. To see if, I don't know, To see if the way you look at me sometimes meant what I hoped it meant. The way I look at him. He had noticed. He had seen past my carefully constructed facade of polite indifference. He had seen the yearning. The thought made my entire body flush with a mixture of shame and a dizzying, terrifying hope. I finally found the strength to move, to push myself off the wall and take a hesitant step toward him. What did you hope it meant? I asked, my voice trembling. Leo closed the remaining distance between us in 2 long strides. He stopped right in front of me, so close I had to tilt my head back to look up at him. He smelled of warm cotton and courage. He gently took my hand, his calloused palm engulfing my own. His touch was not accidental this time. It was deliberate. It was an anchor. I hoped, he said, his voice a deep, quiet rumble that seemed to vibrate directly into my soul, that it meant you felt even a fraction of what I feel when I see you in the hallway. He lifted his other hand and gently brushed his thumb over my cheekbone. His touch was feather-light, but it sent a shockwave through my entire system. I hoped it meant that when I said something stupid like, "Heat me up," you might actually wanna. I am no longer in my body. I am just a collection of nerve endings, all firing at once. His touch, his words, his proximity, it's too much. The carefully constructed dam of my composure, built over years of solitude and longing, finally breaks. A single, hot tear escapes my eye and traces a path down my cheek. He catches it with his thumb, his expression softening into one of profound tenderness. This is real. This is happening. The shift from past tense to present is involuntary. It's because the world has suddenly snapped into sharp, immediate focus. There is no yesterday, no tomorrow. There is only this room, this man, this impossible, miraculous moment. His face is so close. I can see the individual stubble on his jaw, the worry and hope warring in his dark eyes. "Julian?" he whispers, his voice thick with concern. I can't form words, so I do the only thing I can think of. I lean forward, rising up on my toes, and I close the final inch between us. I press my lips to his. It is not a Hollywood kiss. It's clumsy and uncertain at first. My lips are trembling, and his are hesitant. But then he makes a soft sound, a sigh of what sounds like relief, and his hand comes up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. He deepens the kiss, and it's no longer clumsy. It's right. It's a kiss that feels like a confession, like a homecoming. It tastes of beer and bravery, and 2 years of unspoken longing. All the silence inside me, all the gray, felted quiet, is suddenly filled with a roaring, brilliant sound. He pulls back, just enough for our foreheads to rest against each other. We are both breathing heavily. I keep my eyes closed, trying to memorize the feeling of his hand on my neck, the warmth of his breath on my skin. "Yeah," he murmurs, his voice husky and full of wonder. "That's what I was hoping for." When I finally open my eyes, his are right there, searching mine. The playful instigator is gone. The cocky neighbor is gone. In his place is just Leo, open, vulnerable, and looking at me like I am something precious. "So," I say, my voice shaky but my heart soaring. "No more laundry." A slow, genuine smile spreads across his face, the one that makes his eyes crinkle, the one I have cataloged in my memory 1,000 times. "No more laundry," he confirms. "Unless you're into that." I laugh, a real, unrestrained sound. It feels foreign and wonderful coming out of my chest. "I think we can find other things to do." "I'm counting on it," he says, and then he leans in and kisses me again, and this time there is no hesitation at all. It is a kiss full of promise, a kiss that says the silence is finally over. The morning after was a study in anxiety. I woke up slowly, drifting to consciousness on a sea of unfamiliar sensations. The first was the weight of an arm draped possessively over my waist. The second was the scent of someone else in my sheets, a warm, masculine scent of sawdust and soap that had completely permeated my personal space. The third was the soft, rhythmic sound of breathing next to my ear. My eyes fluttered open. Leo was asleep beside me, in my bed. My bed. The reality of it crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. My mind, my old and treacherous friend, immediately began supplying a highlight reel of my worst fears. It was a mistake, a drunken impulse. He would wake up, filled with regret, and the awkward retreat would be excruciating. The beautiful, impossible bubble we had created last night would pop, leaving behind nothing but the sticky residue of humiliation. I had allowed myself to hope, and that had been my fatal error. Hope was a dangerous, fragile thing, and I was an expert at crushing it before it could grow. I lay perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching him sleep. In repose, his face was younger, softer. The confident lines around his mouth were relaxed. A dark curl had fallen across his forehead. He looked peaceful. He looked beautiful. A wave of affection so powerful it almost hurt washed over me, immediately followed by another wave of terror. Caring this much meant I had so much more to lose. Slowly, carefully, I tried to slide out from under his arm. I needed to escape. I needed to put some distance between us, to build my walls back up before he could knock them down for good. I needed to be in my own space, with a cup of coffee and my familiar silence, to process what had happened and prepare for the inevitable fallout. But the moment I moved, his arm tightened, pulling me back against the solid warmth of his chest. His eyes opened, not groggy or confused, but clear and instantly aware. He looked right at me. "Morning," he murmured, his voice a low, sleepy rumble that vibrated through me. "Hi," I whispered, my throat dry. I felt trapped, exposed. He watched my face for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I could feel him sensing my panic, my retreat. The air grew thick with unspoken anxieties. This was it. The moment he would pull away, clear his throat, and say, "About last night." Instead, he just tightened his hold slightly, his thumb stroking a slow, soothing circle on my hip. He didn't say anything else. He just looked at me, his gaze steady and patient. He was giving me space to have my freak out, but he wasn't letting me run. It was the most terrifyingly comforting thing anyone had ever done for me. I finally broke the silence. "You're still here," I said. It came out sounding like an accusation. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "Did you expect me to be gone?" I didn't know what to expect," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "Julian," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Look at me." I forced my eyes to meet his. "I'm not a game player. I told you, I'm not good with words, so I'm just going to be direct. Last night wasn't a mistake. I'm not going to sneak out of your apartment. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. I'm right here, and I'm not planning on going anywhere unless you tell me to leave." His directness was like a splash of cold water. It cut through the fog of my anxiety, leaving behind a stark, simple truth. He meant it. Every word. The reassurance was so complete, so absolute, that it left no room for my usual overthinking. He had seen my fear and, instead of running from it, had walked straight into it and disarmed it. The tension drained out of my body in a rush, leaving me feeling limp and boneless. I sagged back against him, burying my face in the crook of his neck. I breathed in his scent, letting it chase away the last of my panic. He held me, his hand stroking my back, and we lay like that in a comfortable silence that was nothing like the empty, gray silence I was used to. This silence was full. It was warm and safe and shared. "I'm not going to tell you to leave," I mumbled into his skin. I felt his chest rumble with a soft laugh. "Good," he said, "because my apartment is out of coffee." That broke the spell. I pulled back, a real smile finally reaching my face. "You're using me for my coffee now?" The laundry wasn't enough. "Hey, a man's gotta have a reason," he grinned, his usual playful spark returning to his eyes. "And your coffee smells a hell of a lot better than Mr. Henderson's." We made breakfast together in my small kitchen. It was a clumsy, intimate dance. We kept bumping into each other, his larger frame taking up so much more space than I was used to. But it wasn't awkward. It was nice. He found the coffee and started a pot while I pulled out eggs and bread. He leaned against the counter, watching me as I cracked eggs into a bowl, his presence a constant, comforting warmth at my back. "You know," he said, his voice casual, but I could hear the underlying seriousness. I almost gave up. I paused, my whisk hovering over the bowl. "What do you mean?" "On the dryer plan," he clarified. "A few times, I get my basket of laundry ready, walk to your door, and then just stand there. And turn around and go back inside." He shook his head, a look of self-deprecation on his face. I kept thinking, he's not interested. He's just being polite. You're going to make a fool of yourself and make it weird for him every time you see him in the hall. I turned to face him, leaning back against the opposite counter. I thought the same thing, I confessed. Every time I saw you, I'd have this whole conversation in my head, and then when you'd say hey, all I could manage was a stupid nod. I thought you were just this super friendly, super straight guy who was way out of my league. He pushed himself off the counter and took a step toward me, closing the space between us. He rested his hands on the counter on either side of my hips, effectively pinning me in. His expression was serious. "You're not out of my league, Julian," he said, his voice low and intense. "If anything, I'm the one who's out of his depth here." How? The question was genuine. He was so confident, so self-assured. "Because you're quiet," he said, searching for the right words. "But there's so much going on behind your eyes. I can see it. It's like that painting in your living room. It's complex, and it's a little bit dark, but it's also beautiful. And I'm just a guy who hammers nails for a living. I was afraid you'd think I was simple." The idea that Leo, bold and capable Leo, had felt insecure around me was so completely foreign that I almost laughed. "I never thought you were simple," I said, my voice soft. "I thought you were a force of nature." He smiled, a slow, warm smile that made my stomach do a little flip. "Well," he said, leaning in until his lips were just an inch from mine, "forces of nature can be pretty good at knocking down walls." He kissed me then, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of coffee and fresh beginnings. It was a kiss that sealed the promise of the morning, a kiss that said the awkwardness was over, and this new, fragile thing between us was real. The next few weeks were a revelation. My quiet, grayscale world was slowly, methodically being saturated with color. Leo's color. His presence became a fixture in my apartment. He'd come over after work, smelling of sawdust and sweat, and shower while I finished up my projects for the day. He'd emerge, hair damp, wearing a pair of my gray sweatpants that were too short on him, and the sight would make my heart ache with a strange, fierce tenderness. We'd cook dinner together, our movements in the small kitchen becoming less clumsy and more synchronized. We learned each other's rhythms. He was a physical person, and he expressed his affection through touch. A hand on the small of my back as he passed behind me. His knee pressed against mine as we sat on the sofa. His fingers lacing through mine as we watched a movie. Each touch was a small reaffirmation, a quiet statement that this was real, that he was here to stay. And slowly, I learned to accept it. I learned to lean into his touch instead of flinching away. I learned that his presence was not an intrusion, but an addition. He wasn't disrupting my solitude. He was filling a void I hadn't even let myself admit was there. One Saturday, he was working on a small project in my living room. He was fixing the wobbly leg on my antique writing desk, a family heirloom I cherished. I sat on the sofa, pretending to read a book, but mostly I just watched him. He was completely absorbed in his work, his brow furrowed in concentration. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the fine particles of dust his sanding had kicked up, making them dance in the air like tiny stars. The sound of the sandpaper against the wood was a soft, rhythmic shush, a peaceful sound that filled the room. He was so beautiful in his element, so capable. He had brought his own tools, and they were laid out neatly on a canvas cloth on my floor. He treated the old wood with a reverence and a care that made my chest feel tight. He wasn't just fixing a table, he was tending to a piece of my history. "You're staring," he said, not looking up from his work. I felt my cheeks get warm. "I'm not. I'm reading." "Your book is upside down," he said, a hint of laughter in his voice. I glanced down. He was right. I closed the book with a sigh, setting it aside. "Okay," I was staring. "Is that a crime?" He finally looked up at me, his eyes warm and crinkling at the corners. "Depends. What were you thinking about?" I hesitated. The truth felt too big, too vulnerable to say out loud. But looking at him, so at home in my space, so patiently and carefully mending something that was broken for me, I felt a surge of courage. "I was thinking," I began, my voice quiet but steady, "that for years, this apartment felt like a waiting room. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but it always felt temporary. Like I was just passing through my own life." I paused, taking a breath. "It doesn't feel like that anymore." He stopped sanding. He set the block of wood down carefully and looked at me, his expression open and serious. He didn't say anything. He just listened, giving me the space to articulate the massive shift that had occurred inside me. It feels like home now. I finished, the words hanging in the sunlit air between us. Leo's gaze softened. He wiped his dusty hands on his jeans and crossed the room to me. He sat on the sofa, turning to face me. He took my hands in his rough palms a familiar, comforting weight. I know the feeling, he said, his voice a low, sincere rumble. My place was just somewhere I slept. A collection of stuff. I never even bothered to hang pictures on the walls. He squeezed my hands. I feel more at home here, with you, than I ever have anywhere else. It was a simple declaration, but it landed with the weight of a sacred vow. It was everything I had ever secretly, hopelessly yearned to hear. He wasn't just here for the convenience or the novelty. He was here because he wanted to be. He was building something with me, something solid and real, just like the things he built with his hands. He leaned in and kissed me, a soft, lingering kiss that was full of unspoken promises. It was a quiet, domestic moment. There was no dramatic tension, no heart-pounding uncertainty. There was just the gentle press of his lips, the scent of sawdust in the air, and the steady, comforting feeling of his hands holding mine. Later that evening, as we lay in bed, the city lights painting soft patterns on the ceiling, I turned to him in the dark. Leo? Yeah. His voice was sleepy. Thank you, I whispered. He shifted, turning on his side to face me. I could just make out the silhouette of his face in the dim light. For what? Fixing your table. No, I said, a small smile on my face. For having a broken dryer. I felt his chest vibrate with a low chuckle. He reached out, his hand finding my face in the dark, his thumb stroking my cheek. Anytime, Julian, he murmured. Anytime. He pulled me closer, and I rested my head on his chest, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound that had replaced the silence. It was the sound of being found. My world was no longer gray and muted. It was vibrant and loud and messy, and it was filled with the scent of sawdust and the warmth of the man beside me. I was no longer a passive observer of my own life. I was finally, truly, living in it. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was finally home.